It's actually quite a broad term, but I'd say the average academic is somebody who works in university, is engaged in research, but alongside that we also teach, so teaching is an important part of that profile, and typically an academic will be teaching in their area of expertise. Academics have a PhD, which is a postgraduate qualification. Again, this can vary, but typically in the UK it's a 3-year full-time course and you're engaged in a piece of research. You end up producing a thesis at the end, so a written document that describes everything you've done. Typical next step is a postdoctoral research position. So you'll hear of people called a research fellow, a research associate, a postdoc. You could either have a grant that's been awarded to yourself to continue some work, or you could go and work for somebody else with their grant. Some people stay in research positions for their entire career, but commonly people go on then to become a member of academic staff in a university, and that's when their role broadens, where they continue their research that they've been training since the PhD, but they add in the teaching and they add in the administration. I think it's worth mentioning actually the hierarchy within academia, because students are often confused by that. So you start off at a lecturer level, then people progress to senior lecturer, then reader, and finally professor.
With research fellows, the main job that you have is research, and then you usually do some teaching as well because it's good for your CV, and it's always also nice to be interacting with the undergraduates. But you usually have the choice of what you do, and it's much, much less than you would do as a lecturer. I think the issue is that most people probably don't stay as research fellows forever because there's only so far you can often go in terms of getting fellowships. There are very few fellowships that carry on supporting you throughout your career, and they obviously get more and more competitive as you go along. So often the ultimate aim is to try and get a permanent position in the university, such as a lecturing position.
What I would say is that what we do varies with the academic year. We're in January at the moment, so the students are in the middle of taking their exams. So at the end of this week I will start my exam marking, and that's a very intense thing to do, and it won't leave me much time for other things. Other days this week have been much more varied. I've had meetings with PhD students. I've also been reading a PhD thesis because I'm examining a thesis tomorrow, so that involves writing a report. At the beginning of the week, I did some training with a postgrad student who's going to be doing some teaching with us, and that's part of my admin role. I've been working on 2 different papers as well. We're actually just about to submit one to a journal, which is really exciting. That's the bit you work towards. If I was in the middle of last semester, which was my heaviest teaching semester, a week might involve doing a lecture, having a tutorial or 2, which would be with a small group of students focusing on a particular topic. I'll probably have several meetings with final year project students. I'm checking on their progress. You might get some emails relating to your teaching as well. And then on top of that, we'll have some admin and maybe ticking along with your research, but it'd be harder in that week to really make headway with research because the teaching demands are higher. In total contrast, when you're in the summer period and the students are not around, you've got much more time to concentrate on your research. Research in psychology is incredibly varied. It's a really broad discipline. The core element of research is following your research questions. In psychology, it's running your experiments and disseminating that. So for undergraduates can think to final year projects and practical reports. Really the content of that is very similar to the bread and butter of what an academic is doing in their research. But research is actually broader than that, because there are many other elements that keep research going. A good example is peer review. So we send our pieces of research as written manuscripts off to journals, and the journals then make a judgment on whether our research is suitable for publication or whether we need to make some amendments before it's suitable. Well, people have to do that, and the people who do that are us. So I will get sent somebody else's manuscript, and because I'm an expert in that particular field, and asked to give my judgment. And those types of review can take quite a lot of time, and some people end up being editors of journals, so making the executive decisions about the journal's articles, whether they should be published or not. You also do grant reviewing, and you also write grants. So a lot of time in research you're trying to get money to help you do the research, and you may be helping the process in other ways, so reviewing other people's grants, helping the grant awarding bodies make a decision. Part of disseminating your research, aside from just writing journal articles, is to go to conferences. Here we may give a talk to people who are interested in our research. It's a really brilliant way of finding out about cutting edge research that's hot off the press, and also sharing your work with other people. Another aspect of the research process is supervision. So you have PhD students students who work with you, and it's very important that you're enabling them and helping them to produce a coherent body of work. You'll also be supervising people if you have research grants, for example, so people who'll be working for you, collecting data, running experiments, analysing and so on. I would say the biggest challenge of being an academic is balancing the three important roles that you have, so that you're doing research, you're doing teaching and you're doing admin. So for example, if you're delivering your lectures and at the same time you've got comments back from an editor about your piece of research and you need to respond really quickly and get those back, and suddenly everything's happening at the same time and you have lots of competing deadlines. So another challenge of academia, or certainly something that people need to be aware of, is that it's competitive. So as a lecturer, you're wanting to get grants. Now grants are pots of money that you can get from research councils, from charities, sometimes from industry, but they have a very low success rate because there's so many other academics with really good ideas asking for money as well. So that can be difficult and it involves an element of rejection. Earlier in your career, as you come out of your PhD, I remember feeling real pressure in terms of getting a postdoctoral position, one that I was happy with, that suited me, and then knowing where to go next. You want to make that leap into lectureships, which can feel very difficult, finding the right one, having the right research profile and so on. I think because academia is inherently competitive, a challenge can be finding a way to do the research that you want, and that can often involve an element of compromise. If somebody starts off with a PhD, for example, in a particular type of memory research, and like, well, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to go and do a postdoc on it and then carry this on. Sometimes you need more flexibility than that, because you may apply for a grant to continue that work after your PhD and not get it. And you then may look around for somebody else who's doing similar research that you can go and join their lab, and there may not be anybody offering that. So then what do? You might have to think flexibly in terms of moving somewhere where that research is taking place, or doing something tangential but still related, or perhaps something very different. But actually that can often be really fortuitous, because you then end up broadening your skill set. And I think sometimes where people can be really successful in academia is if they can bring together two different areas and suddenly they become very unique in what they have to offer. A really rewarding part is seeing your research idea through that process and coming out the other end with some answers, with some data.
You're coming up with new ideas, looking at things that nobody else has ever looked at. It's incredibly exciting. It's you're finding new things out. It's a bit like being a detective.
Seeing PhD students produce their thesis and go off into their careers is hugely rewarding. Another rewarding part is being a part of a university and working within the culture that a university provides. It tends to be a really supportive atmosphere. You're surrounded by really interesting people who are, thinking for a living, I guess. So you're always someone there with interesting conversations. Being organised and having a good sense of time management. Also say being self-motivated, particularly you start off as a PhD student, you'll see your supervisor, they might not see you for a week or two, and you've got to go away and do something in that time. It's also really helpful if you're somebody who enjoys writing. A lot of academia is about being able to communicate your ideas, so maybe more broadly about being able to communicate, but particularly writing well, or at least having that interest in writing. I'd also say for students considering a career in academia and wondering if they can do it, think about the skills that they're using every day in their undergraduate degree, because the skills that you're developing in your degree will help you very much in an academic career.
You really do just need to start getting experience of research and understanding what it's like to work in a lab, to generate data, to analyse data.
I really suggest talking to people, finding out a bit more, and thinking about what is it that interests you particularly, what really excites you on your course. In terms of finding a PhD, there are websites, but really I recommend being proactive. Think about what it is that you would want to do, and then ask if there are any opportunities. And often there are opportunities, but we won't know and we won't be able to offer them to you if you don't get in touch.